I never grew up in a Christian household in the sense of believing if there was a God. I never really thought about it. A big part of my story was always following the desires of my heart, and the desires of my heart were always to make an impact. I think I discovered a sense of purpose and meaning that was beyond myself, and I was so excited for this pursuit of what it is that I wanted to do. Life decided to hit me in the face. My depression was triggered, and I went through this spiral of this identity crisis, feeling out of place, feeling like I didn't know what my purpose in life was anymore. I never grew up in a Christian household. I would say that I grew up in a normal household. Have an amazing mum, have an amazing dad, had a little brother. And when it came to kind of any type of spirituality, it was just kind of a philosophy around that everything happens for a reason. And I grew up with a mum and dad that taught me the morals of a good person, to be polite, to be kind, to think of others before yourself. But in the sense of believing if there was a God, to be honest, I never really thought about it. And I went on a journey through life like many other people, really following my heart. I've always had a massive heart. I've always loved people. And that's the kind of guiding force that I use to navigate my whole life. To be honest, it served me well. I think a big part of my story was always following the desires of my heart, and the desires of my heart were always to make an impact. So one of the big things for me that when I was growing up, I never really knew what I wanted to do in my life. All I wanted to do was make an impact. And one thing that shed a light on how I wanted to make an impact was with the next generation. I wasn't a confident person. I definitely wasn't a public speaker as I am today. But what I wanted to do was really, really make a difference in the lives of young people. So the only thing that I was good at the time was sport. So I became a PE teacher. I fell in love not with the sport aspect of things, but the aspect of coaching people, helping a young person A to B. And I fell in love with that job. For context around that job, how it worked was I was a sports coach and I went into primary schools. The primary school paid the provider that I worked for, and I got paid an hourly wage. Now, along that journey, an amazing opportunity happened. And that was when the head teacher of the school that I was working for approached me directly and said that he would love me to be their full-time PE coach. Basically, we were going to cut out the middleman. I remember I went home that day and I cried. I cried my eyes out to my mum and my dad, and I said, "Mum, I found the thing that I want to do. I think I discovered a sense of purpose and meaning that was beyond myself. And I was so excited for this pursuit of what it is that I wanted to do." However, it turns out that that would be one of the many times that life decided to hit me in the face. I received a letter from the company that I was coaching for, basically saying that I had signed a non-compete. So if I was to go and work for the school directly, then ultimately they would sue me. And they sent the same letter to the school that wanted to employ me, and that they would sue me too. So within this moment of me going home and saying to my mom and dad, "I found the thing that I want to do. This is it," crying, feeling so aligned with a sense of purpose and meaning, within 2 weeks later, I was told that that wasn't possible. I ended up sitting down with the head teacher and him saying directly to me, "I've tried everything that I possibly can to get you to the school, but unfortunately, we're going to have to terminate the contract." So I went from this sense of this is it to now, what is it that I'm meant to do? Truth is, on reflection, that's really where my depression was triggered, because something that I didn't realize that I did was I rooted a lot of my identity in what it is that I was doing. See, the weird thing about being a teacher is everyone called me Mr. Askew, and there was an identity around that, and people loved Mr. Askew, and people wanted Mr. Askew. But when I stopped being Mr. Askew and I just became Luke, I didn't know who Luke was. And I went through this spiral of this identity crisis and just feeling out of place and feeling like I didn't know what my purpose in life was anymore. Growing up, I was never taught kind of like how to deal with my emotions. I had a typical father that was very loving and very kind, but I never saw him cry. I never saw him struggle. I never saw him process his emotions. I never even knew anything that was actually going on in my dad's life, even though he did a really, really stressful job as a paramedic. And now I know that he went through so much in his life, but he never showed me what it looks like as a young man to go through things and to process things. So all that I did was shove all these feelings that I had of anger, resentment, confusion. I just shoved it all down as low as I possibly could, and I ignored it. And I ignored it for years. And what I did is I went on a journey of pursuing a new sense of purpose, a new sense of identity. And that's when I came across public speaking. See, I found that I was a gifted communicator. And a lot of the time when I was doing the sports coaching that I did, I ended up doing a lot of motivational talks. So that's what I did. I Googled how to be a motivational speaker on Google. And turns out there's not a lot of people in the UK that were doing it. And I paid £2,500 on a credit card to pursue this new vision, this new sense of purpose and identity in the world of public speaking. I got trained up and I went to speak in my old high school, and then the rest is history. Along the way, I kind of met many different mentors and many different people that came into my life. And I went on this journey and this mission to still impact the lives of young people, but not through the vehicle of a sports coaching, but now through the vehicle of public speaking. During that process, I fell in love with entrepreneurship and being a creative and creating content. But what I didn't realize was that I actually never dealt with the root issue, which was my identity. I just kind of created a new identity in what I was doing, and I was pursuing this now. And that's when the journey and the story changes. One of the hardest things I think I found on my entrepreneurial journey and my speaking journey was that I ended up comparing myself to everybody else. You know, when you're in an industry where people have a lot of kind of fame and status and success, it's very, very easy to think that you have to model who they are in order to achieve that level of success that they have. And that's ultimately what I started to do. I started to sound like everybody else. I started to dress like everybody else. And ultimately, I created a version of myself that was not Luke Askew. It was a mold of every book that I'd read. It was a mold of every person that I'd ever met. It was a mold of people that I idolized, people that I ultimately wanted to be like. And the truth is that along that journey, I was posting content online, inspiring other people to dream big and chase their goals when I was miserable. I was saying that the key to life and success was found in the pursuit of a vision and a dream, not in who you are as a person. And along that journey, I started to lose myself again. I started to struggle with who I was, my identity. I started to struggle with the pressure that came with being an entrepreneur. I ended up in £15,000 worth of credit card debt. And I started to believe all these videos that were telling me, just keep investing in yourself, keep investing in yourself. And so that's what I did. I kept spending on credit cards. And ultimately, I was pursuing a dream or a vision of myself that ultimately I thought would lead me to a sense of fulfillment and purpose in my life. And eventually, I just hit a brick wall. And I remember at the time, I had a relationship that I was in. I'd moved out of home. I was living with a girlfriend at the time. And the truth was, like, I didn't like the life that I had created. I didn't want to be with this person anymore. I didn't want to pursue the vision that I had anymore, because ultimately I felt like it was all falling away. And I remember it like it was yesterday, because it was the night of the bombing that took place in Manchester at the Ariana Grande concert. I remember that night, it was about 2 a.m. in the morning. I had my very first panic attack. the only way that I can describe it is like, it was like a trauma cry. Like, I cried so much that I actually burst the blood vessels in my eyes and I couldn't catch my breath. And I remember my girlfriend at the time couldn't kind of shake me out of what was happening. And at the age of 22, my girlfriend at the time had to ring my mum to come and drive to my apartment and cradle me to sleep at 3:00 in the morning. And then the crazy thing was, the next day, I got up, turned on my vlog camera, cracked on, and went and spoke at a college and did a motivational talk about how they should pursue their life and their dream and their vision. And it was in that moment when I turned up at this talk, an hour late, all puffy-eyed, and I realized that the message that I was preaching was false, and the message that I was teaching wasn't fruitful. And then from that moment on, I didn't speak again for the next 2 years. At this time, like, I didn't know God, I didn't know Jesus, I didn't know anyone. So the weight of this pressure and the situation that I was in was it just felt like it was on my shoulders. And I didn't know how to get out of this situation. And I had to make some really tough decisions. Made a decision to leave my girlfriend at the time, made a decision to stop speaking, and I went and got a regular job. And when I say a regular job, it's because I'd placed my career and this vision of who I wanted to be as the number one thing in life. So when I had to go and get a job as a mobile phone salesman, I felt like I'd failed. I felt like I was an imposter. I felt like everybody that had followed me on social media would kind of judge me and kind of see that ultimately everything that I was saying was just a lie. And I remember at the time, rather than going back home, I went to live with my uncle in Manchester. And the reason being is because I'd left home. I'd made the decision to go out and kind of fly the nest. The last thing that I wanted to do was go home, because I felt like if I was to go home, go back in the bedroom that I grew up in, then ultimately I had really failed. And rather than going home, just asking for help from my mum and dad, I decided to not do that and go and live with my uncle in Manchester and again, not face the reality of where I actually was. So I moved to Manchester. I moved in with my uncle and my auntie, who are two incredible people that I love dearly. It was the first time that I just sat with how I was feeling and I couldn't stop crying. Every single night that I spent there, I just cried, bawled my eyes out. I took a picture of me sat on my uncle's floor and I was just crying. It was a public post to everyone that followed me at the time saying, don't believe everything that you see on social media. Because the post before that was me giving a motivational talk. It was me posting a motivational quote, and the post straight after was me broken, not knowing who I was, struggling with my sense of purpose and meaning in the world. And I remember I posted this post and people started reaching out to me, basically saying that they were struggling with the same thing, that they appreciated my vulnerability and my authenticity. But what that meant for me was I have failed. Like, and I don't know what to do about it. And that's when I think I went into the darkest period of my life and my mental health. I still hadn't encountered Jesus Christ. I still hadn't had an understanding of God. So all that pressure was just on my shoulders. And then my mind started to run wild with the thoughts of, well, how are you going to get out of it? How are you going to get help? Maybe it's just better if you just end it all. I don't feel like I was suicidal, but I do remember having the thoughts of going, well, if I don't get out of the situation, surely that's the only option. And I remember my uncle and auntie went away. I was sat outside in Manchester in the rain, just bawling my eyes out. And I found myself calling out to a God that I actually didn't believe in. You know, I always say to people, like, there's a point in your life where you're driven to your knees, and that was my moment when I said, right, if there's a God, if there's something out there, I don't know what it is, I need you to step in, because I'm done. I'm finished. And then all of a sudden, this peace out of nowhere just drops on me. And I remember it being so tangible because it stopped me in my thoughts. It stopped me in the way that I was feeling, it brought to my attention this presence that I now know to be God. And in this moment when I was like, what is this? That's when I received what I call a thought with authority. And when I say, oh, then the voice of God came into my head, I describe it at the time was I just had a thought and it came to the forefront of my head and it was a name. And that name was Haley Melander. And Haley Melander at the time was a youth speaker, just like me. And in the kind of speaking circle, she was one of the individuals that I knew that a few of my mentors and a few people that I'd spoken with, she was in that inner circle. And I didn't have any type of relationship with her. I didn't really know her that well. In my pit of misery, for me to even start thinking about her was strange. And I always say to people, like, her name just kept running through my head all the time to the point where I was like, maybe I need to speak to her. So I reached out to a friend of mine who knew her well and had her number. I remember texting her or reaching out to her and basically just asking if I could speak to her. I knew that she had a story. I knew that her message was something like from pain to purpose. I knew that she'd struggled with her mental health in the past. So my intention was just to be honest with how I was feeling and what I was going through. So I didn't know much about Haley. All I knew was that she had a story and that was from pain to purpose. I knew that she had some history with mental health and depression. So I felt like I should probably just reach out to her and just be honest with where I was at. I remember Haley saying to me at the time, you know, if you're still speaking, you need to stop because you can't pour out into other people if you're empty. And she just guided me graciously to stop speaking, to seek help. And I remember at the time, she was a big encouragement for me to go to the doctors and actually have a conversation with a doctor and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling. What do I do? I remember at the time the doctor was like, well, you've got two routes. I can either prescribe you with antidepressants or I can send you for kind of like therapy or CBT. So I chose the therapy option. I actually never ended up going to therapy because it took so long to actually to receive an appointment. But what he did do was sign me off for 3 weeks with my depression and anxiety. Said that I wasn't fit for work. So over this 3-week period, I started to really just try and sort myself out. I started to try and look after myself better. I started to ask bigger questions. And ultimately, I wanted to speak to Haley more about her story and what she was going through or what she had gone through. And I remember after the 3 weeks of being off, I went back to work. And the first thing that I actually ended up doing on my lunch break was ringing Haley. I remember Haley sharing with me how she was in a place where she wanted to take her own life. But ultimately what she ended up doing was giving her life to Jesus. She told me her testimony and she said to me, like, Luke, the God that you called out to, the God that you're seeking right now, his name is Jesus Christ. He can set you free. He can save you. At the time, I remember replying like, who? Like the guy that died on a cross like 2,000 years ago? Because the only time that I'd ever heard about Jesus was in school, in like my RE lesson. I had no upbringing in that space at all. Even the concept of being saved, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was being saved from. So when she started to speak about Jesus, if I'm totally honest with you, I kind of took it with a pinch of salt. And I was like, right, okay, I'll see how I get on. And I remember the same day, my manager, Portuguese guy, he calls me into the office and I thought that he was going to do a return to work. You know, I'd just been off for 3 weeks and what he should do is ask me how I am and, you know, is there anything in place that ultimately I need to be able to work efficiently? And he sits me down in his office and he says to me, Luke, your depression is spiritual. And I was like, you what? And he says, do you know who Jesus Christ is? And I was taken back because I thought he'd listened to my phone call. I thought he was kind of taking the mic. I really didn't know what he was saying, but he started to share how he used to be addicted to weed and how he struggled with his mental health. And ultimately, him and his wife ended up giving their lives to Jesus Christ. And that he said that my depression, Jesus Christ can heal it. So now I've got Haley talking about Jesus Christ. I've now got my manager talking about Jesus Christ. I ended up going downstairs onto the shop floor and this man walks into the shop. And when I say that this man was glowing, like, this wasn't just like an aura, this was a presence that was on this man. And he walks in, he stands in front of me in the counter, and he says to me, "How are you?" And when he said them words, "How are you?" I thought this guy knew everything that was going on in my life. I ended up just going like, "I'm not okay. I'm struggling with depression. I'm struggling with this." For some reason, I just start opening up to this customer who asked me, "How are you doing?" And this guy spends the next 10 minutes just talking about his life, talking about his perspective on life. And at the end of the conversation, he goes into his pocket and he hands me a card and he says, "Hey, if you ever want to speak more, just give this number a ring." And he passes me this card, and on the back of the card was a Bible verse. I knew that the Bible was linked to Jesus, and I was like, okay, this is now getting strange. So I ring up Haley again and tell her that my manager's talking about Jesus. This guy walked into the shop and he's talking about Jesus, and you're talking about Jesus. What do I do? And I remember her just saying, "I'm going to send you a prayer and I just want you to pray it." And basically what you're going to do is you're going to invite Jesus to come into your life and he will do the rest. So I find myself in my uncle's bedroom in Manchester reading out this prayer to invite Jesus Christ into my heart to become my Lord and Savior. I'm going to be straight up honest. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know if I necessarily believed it, but by faith, I think I chose to believe that this God, this Jesus could maybe help me. So I say the prayer and nothing happens. And I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I was expecting heavens to open, Jesus to walk into the room. I didn't know, but nothing happened. I remember reaching out to Haley again and saying, "Now what?" And she's like, "Well, have you got a Bible?" So I ordered this Bible on Amazon, and it's this big Celtic green Bible that I didn't know what to do with. And it comes the next day on Amazon Prime, and I open it up, and I remember reaching out to Haley again and saying, "Now what?" And she says, "Just pray to God and open the Bible and allow him to start speaking." So I pray to God, I open my Bible, and I'm dyslexic, so I'm trying to read this Bible, and this is not making any sense. So I started to doubt that Jesus was even real. You know, I'd prayed, I'd tried reading this Bible, and nothing was kind of working. And then later on in that evening, I went onto YouTube and I was searching for things around anxiety, because that's what I kind of had experienced. And I came across this video that was called "When Anxiety Attacks." And it was by this guy called Stephen Furtick. Now, I grew up watching motivational speakers, and I had never seen a sermon before. I'd never seen a preacher before. So I just thought this guy was a motivational speaker. So I stick the video on and I start listening, and he starts speaking about anxiety, but he starts teaching these principles and stories out of the Bible. And I can't remember what it was that he said, but he said something that when he said it, I was never the same again. There's that famous verse in the Bible that says, "The truth shall set you free." Well, the truth of what he said in that moment, that revelation, broke my depression. It broke the anxiety that I was feeling. And in that moment, I realized that Jesus Christ was real. And that's when the journey continued. I remember getting in the car the next day, and Haley started to send me like gospel music and these Christian songs that, again, I'd never been exposed to. And she sent me this one song by Anthony Brown called "Worth." And there's a part in the song that says, "You thought I was worth saving, so you came and you gave your life." Now I put this song on in the car, and I start bawling my eyes out. And what I can only describe as the presence of God fills my car and fills me. And I remember I was actually driving to my best friend's house. And for context, my best friend, like growing up, atheist, like still today, not really a believer in God, but he knew what I was going through. I remember I got to him and I said to him like, "Hey, Cal, I think my depression's gone. I think my anxiety's gone." And he was like, "Okay, like how?" And I was like, "Jesus Christ." And straight up, he thought I joined a cult. He didn't know what was going on. And I just said to him, like, I've had this encounter with Jesus that has changed my life. And he's such a good guy because even though he didn't believe it, he was just very supportive, like whatever helps you, go for it. And I just went on this journey of just seeking God. But then the next part of the story, I guess, is, well, what do you do when you're now a follower of Jesus? I needed to join a church. So I remember at the time, I didn't know what church to go to. So I heard that praying's a good thing to do. So I remember just being like, right, God, Jesus, whoever I'm talking to, I need a church, like send me to one. I ended up randomly coming across Hillsong, and it was a new church plant in Liverpool. And I was exposed for the very first time to other Christians, to other followers of Jesus. I remember pulling up in the car with now my wife. She came to church with me, and the first thing she said was like, this is a church? Like, everyone's young. Like, everyone was a similar age to us, and everyone kind of dressed similar to us. In my head, a church was these pews and people probably over the age of 60 singing hymns. And I remember I joined this church, and I met these incredible human beings that were just lovers and followers of Jesus. And I think the big thing that God showed me was that I was never alone. Because previously I'd mentioned that I'd kind of had circles and mentors around speaking. And it turned out that everyone that I was around were Christians. All these mentors, all these other speakers that I was rubbing shoulders with, they were all followers of Jesus. And I just didn't know it. So when I then told everybody that I'm a follower of Jesus, it was like I'd adopted a new family. All of a sudden I had these brothers and sisters. I had these people that came into my life and started to mentor me, started to disciple me, teach me more about the Bible, invite me to church. And I just fell in love with God's children. I fell in love with God's people. But the challenge that I still had was, what's my purpose? What did you create me for, God? And I remember I was reading the Bible, and the Great Commission came up, which it says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I read it and I was just like, that's it. That's what you want me to do. You want me to go and make disciples. So that's what I started to do. I started to make disciples. I started to tell people about Jesus and lead people to Jesus. And God started to do some crazy, amazing things, brought some amazing people into my life. But he made me realize that my purpose was in him and not outside of myself. I think the lie that I'd believed growing up and the story that I was told in the world was that your purpose is in the world. Your purpose is outside of yourself, and that's where you'll find it. So when they ask you that question of what do you want to be when you're older, you're always thinking outside of yourself, and that you're going to find this missing jigsaw piece in the world. Where when I'd finally encountered Jesus Christ, I realized that I found my purpose and my identity in him. And that all along, everything that I was searching for on the outside of myself was actually hidden within me in the form of his kingdom. When Jesus says that the kingdom of God is within you, that the kingdom of God is hidden, like treasure hidden in a field. The very thing that I was looking for on the outside of myself was hidden in the very place that God knew that I'd never lose it. And that was within me. And I continued to go on this journey of pursuing God, pursuing his kingdom, and pursuing what it means to be a follower of Jesus. I'm so thankful and grateful for God that he would choose somebody like me to help do his will on earth. I think a big part of my testimony and a big part of my story is that if you're somebody that is looking for your purpose in the world, you'll never find it, because your purpose is in the very place that God intended it to be, which was within him, and he lives in you. So it continues to be a journey that I'm going on. It will always be a journey that I go on. But I'm so incredibly grateful that in my darkest hour, God would hear a cry of a young man who didn't know him growing up and would still show up and would still choose him and partner with him to lead others to him.